Last week, we talked about how Meta had been talking about, or it had leaked that it was going to release Llama 3.1. It indeed has done that, which is its latest and most advanced open large language model. Now, Llama 3.1 405B has 405 billion parameters. It's touted as the world's largest and most capable openly available foundation model. And Meta says that it, quote, rivals the top AI models when it comes to state of the art capabilities in general knowledge, steerability, math, tool use, and multilingual translation. This model also has an expanded 128K token context window and improves support for 8 languages. Now, interestingly, training Llama 3.1 405B involved significant technical challenges. They used over 16,000 H100 GPUs and processed more than 15 trillion tokens during training. So importantly, and we'll talk about this in a little bit here, Meta has also said that in addition to just being a generally open and powerful large language model, that Llama 3.145B is also going to open up new applications like, quote, synthetic data generation to enable the improvement and training of smaller models. So remember that point as we get a little deeper into this conversation. But before we get into that, Paul, I want to first cover the basics. Maybe can you talk us through at a high level what's so significant about this model's capabilities? And I think in the process, if we can, it would be helpful to clarify what Meta means when they call this model, let's say, quote, open or quote, open source, because they're using that, I believe, in a little different way than maybe typically it's been used.
I think that they've just decided that they're going to define open source as what they're doing. So you do get a lot of arguments about this. And it actually reminds me, 7, 8 years ago when the traditionalist AI researchers, wanted to control the definition of AI, and they just sort of like lost the control of that. And it just became what we believe it to be today. I feel like open source is very quickly heading in this direction. So I think traditionalists from an open source perspective feel like the data should be shared as well, the data that was used to train on it. You're not going to get that. Like as we will learn with Runway in a minute, like there are a number of reasons why these companies, even the supposed open companies, are not sharing the data used to train these models. As some competitive, some because they're stealing copyrighted material and don't want to admit to it yet. There's a lot of reasons, I guess. But they are very clearly considering what they're doing open source, whether traditionalists want them to call it that or not. It is going to be known as that. And that just means they're sharing the weights of the model, basically. They're sharing the technical details of how it was trained, what the weights were. Meta goes into great detail about the technical infrastructure used to train the models. So they're being very open. They're just not sharing the training data.
So maybe talk to me about the bigger picture implications of a model of this size and power that is open. Like you had written this past week on LinkedIn, kind of as part of an in-depth breakdown, you said that Zuckerberg has made the strategic decision to spend tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in coming years to commoditize the frontier model market and undercut the core revenue channels for the major closed model companies. So like, can you unpack what you're talking about there and why this is such a big deal in that context?
Yeah, I'll go into like 3 aspects here that I think are really relevant. So the first is Zuckerberg's letter that came out on Tuesday when they released the model that is really a manifesto for open source. And since we talk so much on this show about open versus closed models and that there's really there's no clear path forward as to like what wins, but this is kind of the battle that we're in. The second component I want to talk about is the fact that much larger models are coming soon. As big as this is child's play compared to what's going to be coming in the next 12 to 18 months. And then I'll kind of wrap my thoughts with some additional context from that LinkedIn post you mentioned. So Zuckerberg's letter, which I would recommend people read, if you're interested in this thread of AI and you want to understand the bigger stuff that's going on here, he published a letter called Open Source AI is the Path Forward. He leads with an analogy of Linux, an open source operating system, as an argument for the future being open versus closed. he uses this Linux analogy in every interview he does. Like, this is his main argument. So his premise is that what Linux did and what open source AI will do is makes things more affordable. And over time, things become more advanced, more secure, because there's a broader ecosystem of people, developers working within these models and developing its capabilities. Um, but he also says very early on in his letter, starting next year, we expect future Llama models to become the most advanced in the industry. But even before that, Llama is already leading on openness, modifiability, and cost efficiency. I believe he's previously acknowledged Llama 4 was already in training, and I'll
Mm.
come back to that in a minute. Um, they announced in Zuck's letter widespread distribution was already in place. So with the launch, all major cloud companies, including AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google, Oracle, and more, you can access this model through them. You can get it through Perplexity already. I'm pretty sure you can actually choose 3.1 to be your model. They also said, Zuckerberg said, companies like Scale AI, Dell, Deloitte, and others are ready to help enterprises adopt Llama and train custom models with their own data. This is a huge play for them, is to work with these service provider companies who can actually go in and build these fine-tuned models for enterprises. He went on to say Meta is committed to open source AI. He outlined why he believes open source is the best development stack, why open sourcing Llama is good for Meta, and why open source AI is good for the world. Um, and then this really becomes the focus of the letter and makes his case for the future. So I think it's important to go through these, not just because Zuck is saying it, but this is very clearly, as I already alluded to, a manifesto for open source. So this is putting a stake in the ground for anyone who wants to push this idea of open source being key to the future. This letter can be used as a basis for that. So I'll just kind of hit some of his key points. So the first is why open source is good for developers, and then in turn, good for brands and businesses and enterprises who can work with these developers to build these models. He says we need to train, fine tune, and distill our own models. Every organization, meaning versus closed, like buying OpenAI's closed model or Google's Gemini, for example. So you need to train, fine tune, and distill our own models, speaking as brands. Every organization has different needs that are best met with models of different sizes that are trained and fine tuned with their specific data. On device tasks and classification tasks require smaller models, while more complicated tasks require larger models. Next, he said we need to control our destiny and not get locked into a closed vendor. He's taking a shot at OpenAI, obviously. A lot of this directly or indirectly is against OpenAI, and then he directly goes at Apple as well. Says we need to protect our data. Many organizations handle sensitive data, and they need to it's secure and can't send to closed models over cloud APIs. We've definitely heard that from enterprises we talk to. We need a model that is more efficient and affordable to run. Developers can run inference on Llama. Again, inference is at the moment when you actually use the model, the output it's giving you, not the training of the model itself. And that this enables it to be, bigger and faster. So now why is it good for Meta? Everyone's always saying, like, why would you give this away? You're spending
Mm.
billions of dollars on infrastructure and then training these models and running them. Why are you giving this away? So he says we have to ensure not locking into a competitor's closed ecosystem where they can restrict what we build. Leads into his comments on Apple. And he talks about this in interviews all the time. One of my formative experiences has been building our services constrained by what Apple will let us build on their platforms. Between the way they tax developers, which I think like 40% or something of every
Mm.
app sale goes to Apple, the arbitrary rules they apply, and all the product innovations they block from shipping, it's clear that Meta and many other companies would be freed up to build much better services. Now, this I thought was interesting, and again, I listened to the interview he did where he talked about this, and I think this alludes to they're going to go insanely hard at glasses, like these Ray-Ban glasses they
Mhm.
have, and
Yeah.
like Project Astra that we saw from Google, like a preview. I could see them spending billions on that in the next like 18 to 24 months, because what he wants to do is create a new operating system. And it actually probably explains why he spent 10 billion on trying to create the metaverse over the last, decade or so. It's because he's trying to get off of the iPhone. He built his apps within a controlled ecosystem by someone else that dictates to him and Meta what they can and can't do, and he doesn't want that in the future. So metaverse was his first play to get around that. His second play is now to build glasses, most likely, and then to build their own language models, build their own intelligence into those devices that no longer require Apple. So that's why they invested and bought Oculus and tried to build the metaverse through Oculus. Now they'll try and do it through these other devices. So again, he didn't say that explicitly, but that is absolutely what he's implying here. He also said he expects AI development will continue to be very competitive, which means that open sourcing any given model isn't giving away a massive advantage over the next best models at that point. The path for Llama to become the industry standard is being consistently competitive, efficient, and open generation after generation. This one actually goes to one of the points I'll finish with in my LinkedIn post because he validated exactly what I was thinking there. And then he says a key difference between meta and closed models is that selling access to AI models isn't our business. That means openly releasing Llama doesn't undercut our revenue, sustainability, or ability to invest in research like it does for closed providers, meaning they're not making their money on, selling the models for $20 a month or the cloud services for, for everything to be hosted. And then he did say, and this was a direct shot at regulatory capture from OpenAI and Gemini, this is one reason several closed providers consistently lobby governments against open source. And then the final notes from his letter, why open source is good for the world. He says AI has more potential than any modern technology to increase human productivity, creativity, and quality of life, and to accelerate economic growth while unlocking progress in medical and scientific research. He also says there's an ongoing debate about the safety of open source AI models. And in my view is that open source AI will be safer than the alternatives. He also says my framework for understanding safety is that we need to protect against two categories of harm, unintentional and intentional. Now, some people may roll their eyes at this point because the whole idea that we're entrusting Zuckerberg and Facebook, of all people, with security and safety, when they certainly have a questionable history of how they have used data and how that their products have impacted people. So that all being aside, The Ugly Truth, is that the book about Facebook? I think I read it a few years ago. I'll look on it when Mike's talking next. But there was a book probably about 3 or 4 years ago that told kind of a rather unsavory history of Facebook. But anyway, so then he goes on to say open source should be significantly safer since the systems are more transparent and can be widely scrutinized. Historically, open source software has been more secure. So my feeling here is should be significantly safer is doing a lot of work. I don't know that this will stay true, and he has not committed to all future models being open source. Like he
Right.
has said in interviews, there may come a point where this isn't it. And even, when they first announced 405B a few months ago, they didn't say it was going to be open source. Like, I don't know that they were sure yet if it was safe to do it. And I do think that's probably why we haven't seen GPT-5 yet. I don't know that they've managed to make it safe enough yet to release it. So I do think that there's a time where Meta changes direction here and does not open source future models, but he maybe leaves it open to that. And then he goes into just some government stuff. So then he ends with the bottom line is that open source AI represents the world's best shot at harnessing this technology to create the greatest economic opportunity and security for everyone. So if you're for or against open source, or if you're neutral on the topic, go read the full article. It's very helpful. The second point I wanted to make, and that he alludes to, is much bigger models are coming very soon. So they trained Llama 3.1 405B on 16,000 H100s from NVIDIA. It's about 480 million in chips, not the cost to do the training, but just the infrastructure, roughly. They don't know the final price of these things, but roughly $30,000 per chip. In March of this year, Meta announced that they had created two 24,000 GPU clusters that were being trained to use Llama 3. So this is only 16K of 48,000 that they already acknowledged was for Llama 3 specifically. So they didn't even train this on the most powerful structures they had already in place. They also at that time said that by the end of 2024, we're aiming to continue to grow our infrastructure build out that will include 350,000 NVIDIA H100 GPUs as part of our portfolio that will feature compute power equivalent to nearly 600,000 H100s. So again, Llama 3.1 405B, which in some ways is on par with the most powerful language model in the world, was trained on 16,000 They plan to have 600,000 by the end of this year. 600,000 equivalent H100s, which I think they're counting for the new Blackwell chip, the
Mhm.
B200 in there, because that'll be, whatever, 5, 10, 20 times more powerful than the H100s. That's $18 billion in chips. That's not the data centers and the training. That's just the chips they're buying from NVIDIA. So they're planning on having 600,000. We know XAI is going to, claims to have 100,000 by the end of the year. Who knows how many OpenAI has? Like, they are very good at keeping that a secret.
Yeah.
The rumors are that GPT-4 was trained on 25,000 A100s, which is a previous generation of NVIDIA. So probably the equivalent of, I don't know, 10,000 GPUs or H100s, let's say. So we're like, we know all the frontier model companies have hundreds of thousands more GPUs than they've used to train the versions we currently have. And so as long as these things keep getting smarter, the more data they're given, the more GPUs they're given, the more time, we're heading toward this massive leap forward.
Hmm.
Now, this doesn't even account for the fact that these are just large language models. Like Jan LeCun, the chief scientist and what is his title? Executive vice president or something of AI. So he's the chief AI scientist and an EVP at Meta. He doesn't even think language models are the path to intelligence. So like all this spending and stuff isn't even what he envisions being the path to true intelligence. So with that being said, I will wrap up my thoughts on this section with what I posted on LinkedIn, because this is what I find myself thinking about all the time. Okay. So Meta released Llama 3.1 405B. Early reports are that it is very impressive, very powerful, and most importantly, open source. The excerpt you read already. In essence, Zuckerberg has made the strategic decision to spend tens, if not hundreds of billions of dollars in the coming years to commoditize the frontier model market and undercut the core revenue channels for Anthropic and OpenAI and the emerging market potential for Google, Microsoft, Amazon by giving the technology away. Why? Because he can. They are printing money without a cloud or enterprise software business. They don't need the AI models to grow their revenue. They can just infuse their AI into their existing social networks, which I believe is about 4 billion people or so have Microsoft, or not Microsoft, have Meta applications like WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook. And their future AR glasses, metaverse, whatever it is, cash cows, and attempt to dominate the AI model market by winning with developers. This drives innovation and makes them look like the Robin Hood of AI. But here's what I can't stop thinking about. How big of a leap will GPT-5, or whatever they name it, be when it finally launches this year? GPT-4 was released in March 2023. That's 17 months ago, which in AI timelines is a lifetime. It's taken this long for all of these other companies who have been spending billions of dollars on research and development, talent, GPUs, and training to create comparable models to GPT-4 and GPT-4o, the GPT-4 class of models, we'll say. In nearly 1.5 years, no one has built a definitively better model, but everyone seems to have caught up, which takes me back to GPT-5. OpenAI knows their competitors are already working on bigger, more generally capable multimodal models, as well as smaller, more efficient models. Meta is training Llama 4. XAI is training Grok 2 and Grok 3 that we talked about on episode 106. Anthropic is probably training Claude 4. Google is probably training Gemini 2. So does OpenAI just build a model that gets surpassed 3 months later by the next frontier model, as Zuckerberg proposes in his letter? Or do they release something that sets the standard that everyone chases for 1 to 2 years again? And if they do, what are the breakthroughs that would need to be achieved in order to give them the pole position in the pursuit of AGI? In short, and this is really critical here, have AI frontier models been commoditized, as Zuckerberg would present that they are,
Hmm.
and the future is simply continuous parallel innovations across leading labs? Or does OpenAI still have an unknown competitive advantage that gives them a unique ability to build the most advanced models possible? I guess only time will tell, but I don't think we'll have to wait long to find out. So I think this is the critical thing. And again, I'll kind of read that line again, because I think this is the foundation of it all. Have AI frontier models been commoditized, and the future is simply continuous parallel innovations across leading labs? Or does OpenAI or Google, with their new math product that we're going to talk about, has someone found a breakthrough, or will Meta be the one to unlock with Jan LeCun, that actually leapfrogs everybody
Hmm.
and they can't catch up for a couple of years? And we don't know the answer to this. Zuckerberg seems to be on the path of, yeah, it's just basically parallel innovation. And all these researchers are jumping lab, and they're just taking the innovation with them and giving it to the other lab. And everybody's just going to keep like every 3 to 6 months one upping each other. And there's going to be no definitive, most powerful model in the world. I don't know if I believe that, but that's what they're presenting.
So, as kind of a coda to this topic, just really quickly, could you maybe talk a little bit, just kind of in a near term practical sense, about this whole thing they're talking about using synthetic data to train smaller models, and like why that's an important kind of near term piece here?
Well, they're like, so the one concern people have is we run out of data, that
Mhm.
there's only so much data in the world that's publicly available on the internet, whether it's, audio files, video files, text files, images, whatever it may be, that at some point they run out of data to give these models and they need to create new data. Um, and so by creating these bigger models, those models can create new data that's derivatives of human intelligence. And then that data can be used to train the models. And research is sort of conflicted at the moment on whether or not this will actually work. And as you scale up this synthetic data, does it actually start to break down? So we don't know, but like I know Anthropic is very big on this. I believe OpenAI is like, a lot of the research labs seem to think that there is definitely a path forward for this where synthetic data becomes the primary training data.
And so, kind of the core thesis here is you give these models more compute and more data. And so far, they appear to get smarter. And we just talked about all the chips. Clearly, we've got a long runway of more compute to give them. So, if you can crack the code on the data piece of this, it seems like we could be in for some significant improvement.
That is the assumption.